Here we go. Okay, good evening. I hope you're all doing well. We are a little bit more than halfway down on Nun Beis Mid Aleph, and we're going to be learning to the bottom of Nun Beis Mid Beis to the Mishnah there, and then we'll stop for the night. And then tomorrow, Amir Hashem, we'll squeeze in a blot and a half. Shabbos, tomorrow's Thursday. I think Shabbos we're already there. Like it's going to follow the 2:30 mincha. I don't know that there's really much value in staggering. It just we can. I don't really care whatever you guys want to do. What? Yeah. We're not doing after Shabbos though. We're going to keep it on Shabbos. But maybe we could just. I know. Yeah. No way. So yesterday, right before the end of shiur, we learned about a very, very subtle text difference between a Kal V'chomer presented by Rabbi Yishmael and a Kal V'chomer presented by Rabbi Akiva. And we asked in the Gemara one-third of the way down, my Beinahu, and Rav Ada bar Abba said that the machlokes, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel, had to do with whether or not Shiraim was ma'akev. And Rav Papa said, no, that's not correct. Shiraim is definitely not ma'akev, but rather the machlokes was about mitzvah chata sa'of ma'akev kamiflagi. Now, yesterday at the end of shiur, David pointed out to me, what does that mean, the mitzvah? So I did a little bit of research, and really, when they do malika on the bird, while they're holding the bird, they kind of move it in the direction of the mizbech, and some blood spurts out, a small amount of blood spurts out. And then after that, we're mamatzah. So the question was that second mitzvah, was that le'ikuva, yes or no? That was the discussion that Rav Papa held, that is what Rav Papa held was the machlokes between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. And then the
blood that comes up from the first
from the malika.
motion, you're saying.
So the malika, a motion is zrika.
Yeah, it is
That's a
something,
zrika. Something happens. And then afterwards, you squeeze the animal's neck in such a way that blood exits, a little bit of extra blood. It's the equivalent of zrika and shirai. And then the Gemara says, Tanya Kavase de Rav Papa. We're going to see in this complex brisa that Rav Papa is correct that there's no machlokes shiraim, but really the discussion is about mitzvah chata sa'of, that Rabbi Yishmael holds that it's ma'akev, it's a requirement to do mitzvah chata sa'of, and Rabbi Akiva holds that it is not ma'akev. Tanya Kavase de Rav Papa. The pasuk says in Vayikra Daled Zayin, this pasuk's talking about Par Kohen Mashiach, and the pasuk reads Ve'es Kol Dam Hapar Yishpoch. A little bit of mistakes in the Gemara here. Ve'es Kol Dam Hapar Yishpoch. Ma Talmud Lomar Hapar. What does the word Hapar teach me? I don't need you to say the word Hapar. I already know from the beginning of the pasuk what we're talking about, and from the previous pasuk. So what's with the word Hapar? So it says the Gemara that even though our pasuk is talking about Par Kohen Mashiach, Limit al Par Yom HaKippurim, Sheton Matan Damim Liyasod Divi Rebbe, that the word Hapar teaches us that just like by the Par Kohen Mashiach there is a certain halacha, so too by the Par Yom HaKippurim that it requires Matan Damim Liyasod, that by the Par Yom HaKippurim that we need to do shirayim and pour it on the yesod of the mizbeach hachitzon. That's Shitas Rebbe. And Amar Rabbi Yishmael, and we'll see here that this machlokas Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva is going to extend similarly to what we saw by Rav Papa. Amar Rabbi Yishmael says, no, we actually don't need the word hapar to teach that, because I could show you the din of par Yom Kippurim that it has to be poured on the yesod from a kal v'chomer. What's that? So we're two-thirds of the way down on Nun Beis Mid Aleph, and the Gemara says a kal v'chomer in the name of Rabbi Yishmael that shows that a partial Yom Kippurim requires shirayim, requires matan damim biyasod. The kal v'chomer is Uma im misha'ein nichnas damo lifnim. When it comes to a particular korban where the blood is not brought into the mizbeh, into the heichal, which is a reference to the par kohen gadol. So then it's meaning it is brought in, but it's not like a chiyuv to bring it in, only as needed if there's a mistake that the kohen makes. There we say taun yesod. Then misha nichnas damo lifnim chova. Then when there is a korban that does have a stable, fixed, scheduled obligation to be brought into the heichal, which is the par yom kippurim, eino din shataun yesod. I don't need your pasuk of hapar to teach me that par yom kippurim does that. If the par kohen Mashiach needs it, then pashat that the par Yom Kippurim needs it. And Amar Rabbi Akiva, not disagreeing with the function of the kal v'chomer, he agrees with the function of the kal v'chomer, and there's no need for the word hapar. But he does have a slightly different machlokas, a slightly different kal v'chomer than Rabbi Yishmael. Omer Rabbi Akiva, here's his kal v'chomer. Uma mi she'ein damo nichnas lifnai v'lifnim bein l'choba bein l'mitzvah. A par kohen gadol, while it may go into the heichal, it never goes into the lifnai v'lifnim to the kodesh hakodashim. And still, the par kohen gadol is ta'un yesod. Then Misha Nichnas Damo Chova Lifnai V'Lifnim, and then the korban of the Par Yom Kippurim that Taka does go Lifnai V'Lifnim. Eino Din Shaton Yesod. So therefore, I don't need the word Hapar. I could tell you in two different Kal V'Chomers how we know that the Par Yom Kippurim has a requirement for the Shiraim to be poured on the Yesod. I don't need your pasuk. Elamai, why do we have the pasuk? Says the Gemara Yachol that extra word of Hapar is Ya'akvenu, is to teach us that it is a requirement to do, that it is a requirement that the Par Yom Kippurim, the Shirayim Par Yom Kippurim, that it's Matan Yisod is Me'akev. Talmud Lomar that that's not true, that the Shirayim are not Me'akev. And remember, if you look back up at Rav Papa, what did Rav Papa say? Shirayim ein Ma'akven. Remember, he pushed back on Rav Ada bar Abba. Rav Ada bar Abba said the machlokas was whether or not we say Shirayim is Ma'akev. Rav Papa said, no, it's not. And this is why the Bryce is brought here. Tanya Kabbalah said there are Papa that shows that this is not good. The Shiraim are not a Raya. The Shiraim are not a Yikuva. How do we know? Talmud Omar, because the pasuk says, Vayikra Tes Zayin Chav. The pasuk says, V'chila mikaperes hakodesh. When you complete getting kapar for the kodesh, shalmu kol kaparos kulan. When you finish all of your zrikos, you're good to go. Even if you don't do the shiraim, and that's Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. The Gemara also extends a similar kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer lepar kohen mashiach. If you have a par kohen mashiach, which is the par kohen gadol, and me'ata, we can make the following kal v'chomer. Uma mi she'ein nichnas damo lifnim lo chova v'lo mitzvah ta'un yesod. That when it comes to the par mashiach, that the only time it ever goes in is if you make a mistake. It's not scheduled. And there ta'un yesod. Mishenichnas damo lifnim, the par kohen gadol, we're extending a similar machlokes from the par to a par kohen gadol. So there, bein l'chova, bein l'mitzvah, eino din shetaon yesod. So there too we have the same question. Yachal yakvenu. Maybe the repetitive pasuk would indicate that by par kohen gadol, shiraim are also me'akev. Says the Gemara Talmud Omar ve'es kol hapar. Let's get the correct language here. Ve'es kol dam hapar yishpoch. That's the pasuk that we had above, that we had started with in the beginning of this brisa. The brisa that we brought to bring a proof to Rav Papa. That was what the pasuk began with. So what's the drasha in regards to the par kohen gadol? That nitku hakasuv le'aseh, that we do separate out the shirayim from the rest of the activity. V'aso shiur mitzvah lomar loch shirayim ein ma'akvin. So it's a very lengthy brisa. It's complicated, but it's not terribly complicated. But we're basically showing that perhaps there really is an extra word of hapar, and because of that extra word of hapar, perhaps we can say it's ma'akev, and the brisa concludes twice over based on two different psukim, one by par kohen mashiach / par yom kippurim, and one by par kohen gadol, that it is not ma'akev to do shirai. So says the Gemara, the Sava Rabbi Shmuel mitzui chatas ha'of ma'akev. According to the presentation of Rav Papa, when in the previous Mishnah we saw machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, and we said that the difference between them was mitzui chatos ha'of. So Rav Papa had presented that according to Rabbi Shmuel, it's a requirement to do mitzui. So again, the Kohen does malika, he inserts his nail into the neck of the bird, and the bird dies. While holding the animal, he shakes it toward the mizbech, and droplets of blood will come out. Then do you have to do mitzui? We said that's a machlokes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Shmuel held that it was ma'akev. The Gemara is now questioning Rav Papa's premise. The Gemara says two lines from the bottom. V'savar Rabbi Shmuel mitzui chatas ha'o chayiv. Does Rabbi Shmuel really hold that there's a requirement to squeeze blood out of the neck? Again, you already did the zrika or the equivalent of zrika, and now you want to do the squeezing of the blood. That he holds that that's the case. Ve'atana debei Rabbi Shmuel. We have another marimakam from Rabbi Shmuel that says differently. Ve'hanishar bedam yimatzeh. The pasuk says that whatever blood is left over in the chicken after malika, that yimatzeh, you have to press it against the mizbeach. Look what it says. Ve'hanishar yimatzeh. Only if there's blood left over. Turning to the top of Nun Beis Mid Beis. But what if Vishaeno Nishar? What if after Malika, before you have the opportunity to do Mitsui, all the blood drains out of the bird? So the din is lo yimotze, which shows you that it's not le'ikuva. So how could it be that Rabbi Shmuel, as understood by Rav Papa, held that mitzui dam hachatas of an oaf is going to be ma'akev, but Tana de Rabbi Shmuel not that way. So says the Gemara, don't worry. Trei Tana'e ve'aliba de Rabbi Shmuel. The Talmidim weren't sure what the Rebbe said. This happens all the time in Shas. It happens all the time in real life. Sometimes people are quoting one rabbi to say X, and really he meant Y. Sometimes it was A, and he meant to say B. Happens all the time. And the Gemara says that the Talmidim of Rabbi Shmuel were not sure what he held as to whether or not mitzvah chata sa'of is me'akev or not me'akev. Amar Rebbe Rami Bar Chama. Hi Tana, the following Tana in the Brisa we are about to see, Savar holds that Shiraim are me'akve. Now this is against what we just learned. If you recall, that Rav Papa was of the opinion that Shiraim are not me'akev. The following author of the Brisa holds that Shiraim are me'akev. So much as Rav Papa wants to answer the way he does on the previous page, trying to figure out the difference between the Kal V'chomers of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, we're going to have a bit of a pushback because not every Tana agrees with what Rav Papa just said. What's the Brisa? The Brisa can be found it's a medrash actually in Toras Kohanim, and it's based on the pasuk HaKohen HaKohen HaMechate Osa Yochlena HaKohen HaMechate Osa. Here the word mechate means to do zrika. So Osa Shenitan Dama Lamala. That only applies, of course, certain chatas have to be above the chut sikra. So that only applies if you put the dam above the chut sikra. Below osan shenitan dam alamata. The drush of the pasuk is that you have to put the blood in the right place, above the chut sikra and not below. So says the Gemara Amris, you seem to say, Amris v'chime ayin basa, where are you coming from? This is a very interesting phrase. It's actually something like we'd say in our language, like, what are you talking about? Why do you need the code word here is why do you need this pasuk? I already know this. Michlal shenemar, because the pasuk says elsewhere in Dvarim, v'dam zvachecha yishofech al what's the right word? Al mizbach Hashem Elokecha. And it doesn't say yishbechu, it says in the singular. So what do we learn? Lamadnu linisnin b'matan arba shim nosnan b'matana achas kiper. So the drasha there teaches us that one sprinkling is sufficient for a chatas. This goes back to the Mishnayos that we learned many, many blot ago. Yachol af hanisnin lamala shenosnan lamata kiper. Maybe I would assume that the bloods that are put above, or should have been put above, and you put them below, that you'll be mechaper. And says the Gemara, well, Vidinu, I have a logic, and the logic would indicate that it's only valid if the dam is above. Ne'emru damim lamala, v'ne'emru damim lamata. We have one pasuk in Vayikra Dalid, and we have another pasuk in Vayikra Hey, one by Chatas Behema, and one by Chatas Ha'ov. Ma damim ha'amurin lamatan, just like when it comes to Chatas Ha'ov, she'nasnan lamala, non lo kiper. Av damim ha'amurin lamalan by Chatas Behema, im nasnan lamata, lo kiper. So the Gemara seems to say that there's no need for the original pasuk of Hakohen HaMechate Osa. We don't need a drasha for there. I can figure it out on my own from another drasha. I don't need that extra pasuk. Says the Gemara, lo, you've learned incorrectly, and you do need that original pasuk. Because im amris betachtonim shenisnin benesina lemala, if you have a korban whose zrikas hadam should be done below the chut hasikra, but you put it above, there she'ein sofan lemalan lo kiper. There you'll never end up putting any blood above the chut hasikra. There's no like catch up. You never are able to get there. It doesn't happen because you're only putting blood below. Gravity pulls things down, and shirayim is below the chut hasikra. However, Tomar, I might have argued, and this is why we need the pasuk. I might have argued Tomar be'elyonim shenasnan lamata, that if I have a requirement of elyonim that was put below, sheyesh mehen karav lamata, there I'm always going to be adding in the shirayim. So then I might have misunderstood that. That's why I need the pasuk on the third line. to teach me that the blood has to be put, if it's above the chut sikra, then it's above. If it's below, then it's below. You got to put the blood in the right place. So that's what the Gemara said. The Gemara says that therefore we need the pasuk, and the svara that you gave is great, but it's just insufficient. Says the Gemara in the first of the long lines. Wait 1 second. Damim hapnimiyim yochichu. The blood of the chatas pnimius would prove sheyesh mehen karev bachutz. We know that the shirayim, even though the hakrava and the zrika of the chatas was done mibifnim in the heichal, but where was the shirayim done for the chatos pnimius that was done on the outside yesod, on the western wall of the outside mizbeach? So what do we learn from the chatas pnimius? Sheyesh me'en karev bachutz. There is an aspect of the blood that's put on the outside mizbeach. V'im nosnan betchila bachutz lo kiper. But had you put it in the beginning, had you just, like, let's say that was the first thing you did a zrika outside, that would not work. You have to do the main avoda inside. So this, the Gemara compares to the Kal V'chomer that we said 8 lines down when it says V'dinhu, and they're very similar, which therefore brings back the question of why we need the pasuk. In other words, I could have learned this principle from the Chatos Pnimios, and maybe we don't need your pasuk, and now we still have the pasuk available of HaKohen HaMechateosa. Says the Gemara, lo. It can't be that you're correct. That we cannot learn from Chatos Pnimios, because Im Amris B'damim HaPnimim, She'ein mizbeach ha'pnimi memarkan. These words of she'ein mizbeach ha'pnimi memarkan are going to be a big thrust of the rest of our conversation for today. If you say by the blood of the chatas pnimius that when you finish your avoda in the mizbeach ha'pnimi, you're not done yet. Why are you not done yet? Because you have to do shiraim on the outside of the mizbeach. Tomar be'elyonim, then would you be then able to say that if you're doing something on the outside of the mizbeach above the chut sikra, sharei karnos mimarkos osan im naslan lamata ksherim, are you able to say that when there's a chatas done on the outside, that if you, instead of putting it on the kronos, you put it below, it's going to be kosher? You cannot say such a thing. That's why we need the pasuk Talmud Lomar Osa shenitan dama lamala v'lo shenitan dama lamata. It has to be done the right way. So over here, one of the things that we saw is this line of she'ein mizbeach ha'pnimi memarkan. And the person who presented this brisa, which is the shita of Rami Bar Chama at the top of the page, remember he said, Hai Tana Savar Shirayim Ma'akve. Look at this line now where we are, we're halfway down. Mai she'ein mizbeach ha'pnimi memarkan. What did you mean in the brisa when it said that by the chatos pnimios, that if you do all of the avoda and the inner mizbeach, that you are not done yet? She'ein mizbeach ha'pnimi memarkan. It's chatas pnimius. I do all my zrikos on the inner mizbeach, and then it says you're still not done. What does that imply? What are you waiting for? It must be that the shirayim is ma'akev. So that's Rami Bar Chama's argument. It must be, says the Gemara, my taima she'ein mizbeach ha'pnimi memarkan lav elu shirayim. Doesn't that imply that there's a chiyuv for shirayim? And this really goes against Rav Papa, because Rav Papa at the beginning of the day today, really at the end of yesterday, shared that Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva were arguing about whether they were arguing not about shirayim. He held that everyone held shirayim as not ma'akev. Comes along Rami Bar Chama and says, I have a brisa black on white that says the language is she'ein mizbeach ha'pnimi memarkan. By the chatas pnimius, you're not done with the mizbeach ha'pnimi on its own. You have to go out of the mizbeach and do the zrika and do the shirayim on the yesod of the western side of the mizbeach. You're not done until then. Amar le Rava. Rava pushes back on Rami Bar Chama and says, I disagree with you. Ihachi, if that is your understanding, that is something that I could have learned. Teisi bekal v'chomer. I could have learned that the mizbeach ha'pnimi is not done from a svara, from a kal v'chomer. And we are halfway down, a little bit more than halfway down, 6 lines into the wide lines. Ma shiroim ha'pnimiyim shesofan chova b'chutz. When it comes to the chatas pnimius, we know that we will have to bring the shirayim on the outside mizbeach, and asan betchila b'chutz lo kiper. But had I started with that before I did the avoda on the inside of the mizbeach, had I started with that lo kiper, so too hanisnin lamala she'ein sofan chova lemata ve'asan betchila lemata. If I did the above below when I shouldn't have, eino din shelo kiper. All the more so it should be the case that there is no kapara. So how then do we understand that phrase of ein mizbech pnimi mimarkan bilvad? Ela ein mizbech pnimi mimarkan bilvad. What does that mean? If Rava disagrees with Rami Bar Chama, and Rami Bar Chama holds that Shirai Mar Ma'akev, and Rava argues, how does Rava interpret that line in the Brisa that says she'ein mizbech pnimi mimarkan? So says the Gemara, Ela paroches. What it means to say is that the mizbeach alone in the panim is not enough. You also need to sprinkle on the paroches or toward the paroches, not on the paroches. So that's how Rava gets out of it. And the line in this lengthy brisa from Torah's Kohanim, this medrash, we have a machlokes amoraim how to understand the phrase she'en mizbeach apnimi mimarkan, with Rami Bar Chama indicating that it means that Shirayim are me'akev against Rav Papa, and Rava keeping in line with Rav Papa, saying that that brisa meant something altogether different. It was talking about the paroches. Tanu Rabbanan, the last little sugya for tonight. Bekila michaper. We actually saw this drasha a little bit earlier in the Gemara. As you can see over here, it says on the side La'el Daf Mem. So we saw this about 12 blot ago. Let's read the whole pasuk so that it's clear. V'chila, this is Vayikra Tes Zayin Kaf. V'chila mikaper. When you complete and get your kapara es hakodesh ves oal moed ves amizbech v'hikri ves hasiir hechoy. So v'chila mikaper. We have to understand these words. So this is a machlokes. V'chila mikaper im kiper kila. If you did your actions of kapara, namely zrika, then kila, then you're done. The way that he's phrasing it is that it implies that the zrikos are what generate kapara, but the shiraim are extra. V'im lo kiper, lo kila, divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that if you don't do your zrikos, you just won't get your kapara. That part's obvious. So Shitas Rabbi Akiva, first of all, he flips the pasuk. The pasuk says v'chila mi kaper. How does he read it? Im kiper kila. That if you do your zrika, your yotze, shiraim are extras. However, Amar lo Rav Yehuda, he argues, Mipnei malo nemar, why don't you read the pasuk in order? The pasuk said v'chila mikaper, and you darshan im kiper kila. Go in order. Im kila kiper. If you finish everything you're supposed to do, then kiper. And im lo kila lo kiper. Shim chisar achas mikol matanos, that if you're missing anything from the avoda, lo asav lo klum. So it seems almost semantics that one learns the pasuk like Rabbi Akiva does out of order. That the pasuk says chila mikaper, and he learns kapara to kila, and Rabbi Yehuda flips it so that it's the right way, which is im kila v'chila mikaper, that kila's first. So my beinayu, what's the difference between how they darsh in this pasuk? So answer number one, we'll see from one set of Amoraim, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Chadam or Mashmos Dorshanika beinayu. There's no difference; it's just how to do the drasha. And the other one says that there is a difference. Oh, now really what the Gemara has done today is come full circle. We saw that Rav Papa was of the opinion that everyone holds that Shiraim is not Ma'akev. Rami Bar Chama brought a Gemara that says, no, there is a brisa that says that way. Rava comes along and says, no, you're wrong. Everyone agrees to Rav Papa, and there is no Shiraim that are Ma'akev. And now the Gemara says, perhaps it's a machlokas tanaim between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, based on the drash of Akila mikaper. And let's review. According to Rabbi Akiva, im kiper kila, that if you do your actions of kapara, namely zrika, you're done, which means shirayim, according to Rabbi Akiva, is not required. Mashen ken, according to Rabbi Shmuel, who learned the pasuk the other way, im kila mechaper, if you finish everything, then then you're mechaper, then you get your kapara. So then he would then hold that seemingly that shiraim are required. And tistayim, maybe it's logical to assume, says the Gemara, 7 lines from the bottom of the page, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi hu amar shiraim de me'akve. Perhaps the shita that, and this would also align with Rami Bar Chama, perhaps the shita that said that shiraim are me'akev is Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Damar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, the divrei ha'omer shiraim ma'akvin. According to the one who said that shiraim are me'akev, if you spill, this doesn't say this in the Gemara, but the case is if you spilled the blood right before you do shirayim, maybe par echad u'maskil b'tchila b'fnim, you got to start over. So there we see Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi quoting a shita that shirayim are ma'akev, to the point that if after zrika you spill the blood and you can't do shirayim, you have to go get another animal. So says the Gemara, Atu Rabbi Yochanan lest has svara. Rabbi Yochanan said something very similar. Ve'amar Rabbi Yochanan Tana Rabbi Nechemya Kedivrei Omer Shirai Ma'akven. He said the same exact thing. Why are you only highlighting Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi? Rabbi Yochanan also says the same thing. So you said earlier, my Beinaihu, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, they agree with each other. So says the Gemara, you missed some key words. Both in the sheet of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, it says Ledivrei HaOmer, according to the one who says. Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Nechemia, also says Kedivrei HaOmer. So it calls out the Gemara, Ela Kedivrei HaOmer, V'lav Lahani Tana. No. What? No, we were quoting Shitas. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, according to the ones who hold, not that I hold that way. So lav dafka, you can't conclude who holds that. So that's true by the case of Rabbi Nechemia. Hachanami Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi kedivrei Omer v'lav lahani Tana. Could be that there's no link between these two. Could be that we don't know who the Tana is, who the Amora is, who holds that the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel is about whether or not shirayim are me'akev. We'll stop right here at a new Mishnah, and Emir Tashem tomorrow we'll pick up at the very bottom of Nun Beis Amud Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.